Hi and welcome. This is Dr. Lewis, and I'm here to talk with you about normal thyroid function, and then we're going to talk about the thyroid disorders. So let's dig into it. What you have here on the screen is a PowerPoint slide with a concept map. So on the left here, we're going to talk about normal thyroid function. And so the thyroid gets its messages from the anterior pituitary gland. And let's see if it lets me type. It does. It lets me type, but it's upside down, and I realize that. I'm just going to go with it. So this is the anterior pituitary gland, and its job is to secrete thyroid-stimulating hormone, also known as TSH. Okay, and I love it when the hormone tells you exactly what it does. So the anterior pituitary gland is going to secrete thyroid-stimulating hormone, which, as you would imagine, stimulates the thyroid to produce thyroid hormones. Thyroid hormones can be classified. There's two different types. There's T3 and T4. The real names triiodothyronine and thyroxine. Those are your thyroid hormones. Well, T3 and T4 are responsible for metabolism. The thyroid gland also secretes calcitonin. And calcitonin's job is to decrease the serum calcium by sending calcium into the bone. So I like to think about it as something to tone it down. So when you tell someone to tone it down, they're decreasing. So we're going to decrease the serum calcium, send it into the bone. So these are your thyroid hormones. Thyroid hormones function on a negative feedback mechanism, and that's what you're going to see over here. So normal negative feedback, and this is where I believe Dr. Kano used the story of the clinical instructor and the clinical students, and I'm going to repeat it. So let's pretend that I am the anterior pituitary. I am your clinical instructor. Okay, I am the anterior pituitary. You, as my students, you are in my clinical group and you are on the clinical floor. So normal function in a clinical group is that my job as your clinical instructor is to watch over you. And I'm making sure that you're doing what you're supposed to be doing, that you're doing it correctly. Okay. If I'm in clinical, let's say I have clinical tomorrow. Let's say we're in clinical and I see that my entire clinical group is laying around, or you all went and got coffee and you're sitting in the break room and you're drinking coffee. Normal function for me as the anterior pituitary gland, as the clinical instructor, is going to be to apply a stimulus to you that is going to stimulate you to increase your activity and do what you're supposed to. That's normal function. So when you have a decrease in your T3 and T4, the expectation is that the anterior pituitary gland is going to release TSH. Now, I think Dr. Kano also mentioned the, the hypothalamus. Well, I like to think of Mr. Barnes as the hypothalamus. He is my department chair. He is my boss. And so his job is to watch over me. Okay, he's watching over me and making sure I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. And also, he is going to touch base with you. So he's kind of overseeing all of us. The only time he intervenes is when there's a problem with me and ultimately with you. Okay, so just to kind of give you an idea of the relationship there. So let's focus on the relationship between me as the clinical instructor and you as the clinical and students. Normal function, T3, T4 decrease. Me as the anterior pituitary gland is going to apply a stimulus and I'm going to release thyroid stimulating hormone. Let's wipe the slate clean and we're going to talk about the worst clinical day you've ever had ever. And so let's say you're in clinical and everything is going wrong. Every single patient's on the call bell. They're not happy. They're yelling. The nurses are not happy. Okay, they're taking it out on you. And so you're feeling completely overstimulated. You're on the verge of tears, everybody in the group. And so you're all running around and you're getting into panic mode. Would it be a good idea at that point for me as the instructor to apply more stimulus to come along and say, come on guys, pick up the pace? Okay, the answer for that is no. It would not be a good idea. So if I have increased activity, the expectation is, as the overseer, is that I am going to back off. Okay, I am going to reduce TSH production. Maybe I am. Apparently I'm not. Let's see if it lets me. It's not letting me. Okay. Well, normally I would type anterior pituitary reduces TSH, but it's apparently not going to let me do that. Nope. All right. Well, that didn't work out the way it was supposed to. So in your concept map, you would write AP reduce TSH. Not going to let me happen. That's normal negative feedback. Okay, that's normal function, and that's what we talked about with the clinical instructor and the students, and that analogy. But that's not going to happen because you were all excellent clinically, so we're not going to have to apply stimuli or feedback or whatever. Let's move on to when you have reduced function of the thyroid, which is hypothyroidism. And the TSH is going to tell you a lot about what the cause is, because no matter what, with hypothyroidism, your thyroid hormones are decreased. That's hypothyroid. That's hypothyroidism defined as decreased T3 and T4. The difference is, if I want to know what the cause is, I have to look at the TSH level. So let's look at the most common cause of hypothyroidism. And with the most common cause of hypothyroidism, this is what I just discussed. The clinical students over here are slacking off. Okay, not that you would do that, but the clinical students are slacking off. And the instructor, the anterior pituitary, is having to apply a stimulus. So when the thyroid is the cause, the thyroid is slacking off, your TSH is going to be elevated. However, let's say I, as the clinical instructor, woke up this morning and just wasn't feeling it. Okay, and so we're in clinical, and I'm like, you know what, guys? Let's just go get coffee. And we all just leave the floor. We go get coffee, and we're all kind of sitting around and not doing what we're supposed to. Okay, in this case, I am the cause of the decreased production of my nursing students. So if the pituitary is not sensing a decrease in thyroid activity and is actually also not producing stimuli to help stimuli, it is the cause of the hypothyroid function. Now, hopefully that makes sense to you. So that's part one of this negative feedback thing that I'm talking about here. Let's go to the other side of the scale. When you have hyperfunction of the pituitary, or hyperfunction of the thyroid, hyperfunction of the thyroid means that I have elevated T3 and T4. Okay, that's by definition, you would have an elevation of T3 and T4. That's definition of hyperthyroidism, is an increased production of thyroid hormone. So let's look again, because the TSH tells us a lot about the reason why. So if we go to that bad clinical day where you're all running around in a panic, and the reason that you're running around in a panic is because I, as the clinical instructor, am yelling at you, and I am constantly telling you get moving, and I'm constantly applying stimuli, I am the cause for your increased activity. Okay, so if the anterior pituitary, say you have a pituitary tumor and it's producing a lot of TSH, the thyroid is going to produce excessive T3, T4, because the thyroid doesn't have a brain. It says, okay, I'm getting told to produce more TSH. I guess I should do that. So it does. Okay, so there's that. If, however, the problem is in the thyroid glanding, meaning that you, for whatever reason, whether it's external stimuli, whatever reason, are hypermetabolic, your clinical day is going crazy, you're running around, you're answering call bells, you're doing this, you're doing that. Okay. If you're the cause, or external, something beyond the clinical instructor is the cause, you would expect that the clinical instructor or the anterior pituitary is going to decrease the stimuli. Okay, so the TSH level, you're going to do a T3, T4 to determine your primary pathophysiology. If my T3, T4 are elevated, it's hyperthyroidism. If I want to know the reason why I'm hyperthyroid, I really need to do a TSH, because that's going to tell me, is the problem because of too much TSH or not enough TSH? Same thing with hypothyroidism. My T3 and T4 are going to be decreased, but to determine the cause, I really need to look at what my TSH levels are. And I have a little tiny example from my life experience, and then I will end this video. Several summers ago, and I wasn't highly symptomatic, but I was really feeling down in the dumps, very low energy level, highly emotional. And I went in for a physical, and they drew my labs, and my my thyroid hormones were low normal. So they were not quite decreased below normal, but they were low normal. My TSH, however, was elevated. And so what they called this was subclinical hypothyroidism. So basically, my thyroid was starting to slack off, and my anterior pituitary gland has sensed that. And so the anterior pituitary gland was increasing the levels of thyroid stimulating hormone to help to maintain normal T3, T4 levels. And so I received treatment as one would for a hypothyroid condition. And the next time I had labs drawn, all of my levels were back to where they needed to be. So that's the lecture, I guess, a mini lecture on normal thyroid function. The next lecture, I'm going to talk about the disorders of hypo and hypothyroid using a side-by-side comparison. Thanks for your time and attention.